the PRELUDE Festival 2019 edition entitled Riotous Excursions. My name is Kevin Riordan. I feel like that was a wasted applause on me, but that's okay. I'll say this for the spirit of the festival. I'm one of the co-curators of the festival, along with Sanaz, who's sitting back there. Some of you met earlier. In this attention economy, attention is very scarce, so we're very grateful that you've chosen to spend some of your attention with us. And specifically for this event, a very special event featuring Mitu. And what's going to happen in this kind of interesting hybrid event called Dramaturgy Disruption, which gives you a real insight into their work and process and some of the structures underlying it, as well as a glimpse of some of the really interesting work they produce on stage. That is going to be followed by a critical response from Kevin Riordan, who's joining us via the magic of technology from Singapore. Is that correct? From Singapore, and then we will do a brief Q&A, which I think because the group can be very conversational and robust. So thank you for joining us. And now I'm going to throw it to Ruben.
Thanks so much for joining, and thanks for being here for this quick conversation. So the plan of attack and what we'd love to do is spend a little time talking about Theater Mitu and about our process at large, and focusing on this idea that we call Dramaturgy of Disruption. And then really the core of our time will be spent looking at some of the work that we have been building. That's part of our repertoire at the moment. And then, of course, as David mentioned, Kevin will speak a little bit, and then we'll stand in conversation about it. So I'm going to try to follow it as quickly as possible with some of the PowerPoint work. First and foremost, for those who don't know me, my name is Ruben Polendo. I'm the founding artistic director of Theater Mitu. And in behalf of myself, of the company, and of our co-artistic director, Justin Nestor, I want to thank you for joining us. So you're going to get, if you don't know much about the company, you're going to get like a speed lesson about the work that we do. I'm going to set my timer so that I behave in terms of time. So first and foremost, Theater Mitu, you should know, is a permanent group of collaborators. We have been in existence over 20 years. We are, unlike a kind of traditional professorial model, we're really set up much more in the line of what would be like a scientific laboratory, which is a group of individuals who are coming together with a history and a trust of knowledge over time and space, and have been working together. The founding members of the company have, of course, been with the company 20 years plus. Some of the members have been with the company 16 years, 14 years. Some of the newer members have been with the company 3 to 4 years. And this is part of the idea that we're working together. I want to talk a little bit of our mission, and then I'll get more concretely into the work. So Theater Mitu's mission is driven by a commitment to innovation. The company expands the definition of theater through methodical experimentation with its form. This is the big drive of Theater Mitu. It really is about aggressively and quite methodically interrogating the limits of theater. For me, oftentimes, the minute somebody tells me, this is what theater is, I have a little instinct that goes, is it? Does it have to be that? Can it be other, right? So it really is that kind of joyful of an instinct, but also a little bit of troublemaking in terms of pushing what those boundaries are. As a little footnote on all that, a lot of our work deals with global collaborations and global conversations. So with a transglobal view, the company engages artistic practice as research. And this is a word that you'll hear me talk about, which is really not only the making of the work, but the making of the work as part of generating new knowledge, right? As part of actually increasing what we believe, what we know, and how we feel about the work we do as art makers and as theater makers. I want to give us one little bit of context here before we jump into some of the work, which is on this word, MITU, which of course is the namesake of the company. So I want to share the etymology of that word because in many ways it marks a lot of what the company believes stands for and the way that we make our work. I'm obsessed with language. I grew up in Mexico, and so my first language is Spanish. So I live in translation and often spend a lot of time looking up words in the dictionary and being like, what does that really mean? And as the company developed its name, it became important for us to also give it that kind of rigor in terms of the word. So the word Mitu has a few roots. The first is, it comes from the Sanskrit language, which is the root language of the root vocabulary for several languages in the sub-Himalayan area. And it means strength and communion. This is important to us, and it serves as a marker for both the kind of work that we do, as well as the kind of relationship we're invested in having with our audiences. The idea is that we're coming to a space not to create a distance and say, this is what we think and we're going to tell you some wisdom, but rather to posit, to meditate, and to consider these large ideas, and hopefully sit in a space of recognizing each other's, recognizing our limits, our potentials, our heart spaces, our mind spaces, and really acknowledging that that space really gives a lot of power, right? The simplest version is the recognition we give to each other when we have something similar in our memory, right? The example we always give is, you know, if I shared a memory from being a young kid and I said, oh, I had a blue little lunch pail that I loved and it had a little happy face, and you had that, you'd be like, I did too! Are you kidding me? And we get so excited about that, right? And that excitement is really that kind of strength. It's this idea that in that moment we recognize that we live through each other, right? That we share an experience that is in some ways limited, our perception of it, by this, and the idea that it's an illusion and we really connect on a deeper level. And to us, that's really the goal of the work, through some recognition of ourselves, of each other in the work that we do. The next definition comes out of an old Japanese expression for lack of fear. And this is a really important part of the work that we do, which is how much fear it really creeps into the artistic process, right? How, the moment that we're actually truly exploring, we go, what's going to happen? How's it going to go? What's going to turn, right? And that really is at odds with exploring, right? If we were looking at a kind of nature conversation and we're going beyond that mountain, I don't know, if we were going to explore for the first time, nobody would say, well, I can't go until you tell me what's on the other side. Right? That really is at odds with that, versus the idea of saying, let's go and let's bring as many tools, as many things as we might need, let's prepare for it. And so for us, this idea of removing fear from the equation and really engaging with the space of fearlessness in the conversation. And I'm going to go back to that in a moment. Next is in Bengali, which is another language that comes out of India. It means balance. This is important to us. And this speaks of this inherited idea, or it interrogates this inherited idea, that artists have these limits. In other words, oftentimes you get this notion that as an artist, there are certain things you're good at and then other things that you're not, right? So you'll say, oh, I'm an artist, so I'm not really emotional, but I'm just not a logical person, right? And we push against that and say, in fact, that's a muscle to develop, right? I'll often hear a colleague say, oh, because I'm an artist, I'm terrible with money. And I feel like, well, figure it out. Like, just figure it out. That's the kind of growth of an artist, right? You don't get a pass because you're an artist. And so the idea of really finding a balance between your emotionality and the intellectual, between the instinctual and the rational, right? And really making that the work of developing the artist. Another definition for the word comes from the language out of Thailand, Thai language, and it means from the depths of the heart. That's a marker for us in terms of our process as company members, that it isn't about engaging in superficial conversations, but rather in really going deep into what is important to us, what's in our heart space, what's actually disturbing us at that moment, and bringing that into the conversation. In Spanish, of course, it's words for mine and yours, and this also becomes an important marker, not only in terms of our engagement with audience, but actually how we make work. That it really invites this crossing of borders that we've inherited as to how we make work. And I'll talk a little bit more about that with the company, because there really is an engagement and a fluidity of how we give shape to the work that we do. And of course, in English, it's a phonetic for the words Mitu. Now this is important to us because it's actually been a really remarkable experience to see this important and massive movement across the globe around the Mitu movement. And to know that that's actually saying the same thing, which is in union, in community, there is strength, and that gives voice. So for us, it's been a remarkable honor to actually see that word have such an incredibly potent effect in such an important conversation. And so for us, it reminds us that in many ways, the statement "Me Too," which is out there, really does mark a kind of a simple way of saying everything I said before, which is really that recognition, right? This idea of the balance of removing the fear. So these become the markers of the work that we'll do. I want to talk a little bit about how the company looks at the making of work and how we develop work. So again, as a company, we come together in a state of collaboration and develop these large-scale projects. The projects look and engage in technology, they're very physical, they're very visual practices, and source from a lot of different materials. So we have a step that we call a laboratory. So laboratory is a kind of space that really, I'm getting cut off. Can I get your help, Justin, on that? This is how it works. Just to let you know. Thank you. So laboratory is a really key moment for Theater Mitu, and it's a space that we come that's different from actually developing a project or a workshop. And it's a space that we come together and engage in a whole host of instincts that company members are having. In terms of what is on your mind? What is on your mind in terms of your own life, your emotional life, your political life? and to look at what that brings into conversation and what are the arguments, the discussions that we get into, and really begin to elasticize that. So laboratory for us, thank you, Jay. Laboratory for us looks at this idea of interrogating, and keep going. I love that there's actually a picture of you doing exactly what you're doing on that slide. The idea again is to interrogate, to really look at questioning these instincts in the conversations. The idea of experimentation, to really begin to see what do those ideas give birth to and what do they give shape to as artists, right? How do we begin to have that conversation? The next is the synthesis. How do we begin to synthesize our ideas together as a group? Not in a space of agreement, but actually in a space of discussion, and in a space of argument. This notion of ideating, right? What comes to mind? What are the images and so forth? And of course the idea of development, of developing these ideas into possibly something meaningful. So this is really the kind of laboratory space. So it really is a space of interrogating the instincts that the company is having. I'm going through this quickly because I want to get to the work, so bear with me. The company also has a really pivotal pillar, which is that we train as a company. Our training takes a lot of different shapes. The training promotes and strengthens the permanent group of collaborators. This is different than the making of work. This is a space in which we come to develop the muscles that we need to come together as a company and to make the work. It furthers the growth and development of each company member as an artist and as a leader. And you'll see as I speak more of the company's work that this is really important, that the company really brings a leadership conversation in terms of the ideas versus a one kind of a structure to the dialogue. The training takes on a range of forms, including our company training, which is physical training that we do, field research as we explore the world and engage the work with artists. Intensives, which are these training intensives where we invite artists to come and join us in the physical training. Educational initiatives. We spend a lot of our time working with educational institutions, including universities, where we engage students in this kind of training and this kind of making of work. One of the other hats that I wear, other than as founding artistic director of Theater Mitu, is I'm the chair of Tisch Drama, which of course is the drama department for NYU. And so that's another way that the company's training interjects in that. I love that there's like a subtle alum pride. That is like alum pride. We are, of course, also engaging these community engagements, which is coming into conversations with individuals who are actually not engaged in the artistic conversation. This looks like a lot of things. In this image, you actually see us working with children out of an area called the Ger district in Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia. And it was about coming to into a space of joy and of storytelling with these young students, none of them who are at the moment dedicated towards making art. But it was super cool to engage in a conversation and to have them ask questions of the work that we are making and doing. The training this key is for each and every company member, which is all of us, myself included, engage in all of this work in a whole host of different ways. Oftentimes, particularly in traditional theater systems, when one speaks of training, there's a kind of reference to the actor. And for us, it's important for everybody in the company to engage in the conversation about training. And so then we get to another key pillar, which is, of course, production, which is the manifestation of the work. And this is the moment where we, as the source, as the artist presenting something, engage the witness, engage the audience, right? And of course, this is the moment where we rest and apply on our company training, where really the rubber hits the road to make the work that we're going to make. We investigate findings from our field research, from the laboratory, and this is a really key thing because we separate this from that laboratory space, which is a space of exploration. In this production space, we really come together to make the work. And we assess the impact on the company, the witness, and the form. This is a key step in the work of Theater Mitu, which is not just about doing a show. We're interested in this longer journey, which is, of course, the mission of the company. And so upon presenting and making it work, we really investigate what was the impact? What was the impact on the audience? What was the impact to the company members? And how did it impact the form? Was there, in fact, new knowledge added? Were there new questions brought to the table or new interrogations on how we make work and how we engage the audience? It's worth noting that for all of this to happen, Theater Mitu continues to really home itself as a company, and I'm proud to say that we now home ourselves in a home, which is, we have a home in Brooklyn. We have this remarkable space that if you haven't been to, I invite you to, called Mitu 580. And Mitu 580 is this really beautiful. It's hard to see in this photo, but it's this beautiful retrofitted glass recycling facility that we as a company have shaped and really made very proudly with our own hand. We literally painted, you know, the doors and installed the things and did all that to make it happen. It is a key space for us that is intended to bring transdisciplinary arts practice and to really interrogate and incubate the work that I'm talking about here. So I want to jump to these definitions again and really zero in on this one, which is this idea of lack of fear. This becomes a really important conversation, or oriented rather, for the conversation that we are to have. For us, one of the things that is really important to look at is what are the things, practices, procedures, and processes that we have inherited in the making of theater, in the presenting of theater. And what histories do those inheritances reflect? What has that privilege and not privilege? Who has it worked for and not worked for? What has it celebrated? What has it erased, right? So oftentimes for me, the minute that we're told this is the best way to do it, or this is how we do it, I do seriously begin a whole journey of interrogating that, of really looking at that as not a fact, but actually an inherited belief, and acknowledging that there are many ways, not only globally, but through time, in which theater has been made, and that there will be many ways. Our form as an art has changed drastically over the last 50 years, over the last 100 years, over the last 500 years. Theater didn't look like, it wasn't made, it didn't sound like the way it does now. Yet somehow we might make ourselves believe that this is how it has always been, and this is how it will always be. Right? And for us, that becomes a little bit of an asphyxiating idea. And so the notion for us is really that we tend to not explore that because there is a fear. There's a fear that if you explore beyond those inherited and perhaps tried and true ideas, you may fail, right? And so for us, that's actually a really important thing to acknowledge and to travel past, and to actually truly look at those inheritances and interrogate them in the making of the work. Not just around the table discussing, but actually put it in the making of the work and bring it into conversation with audiences. And so this really arrives at this phrase that David mentioned, which is really the core of the conversation, which is we'll talk about the dramaturgy of disruption. So for us, the word dramaturgy, which is often a debated and discussed word in our field, for us, dramaturgy, the best way to understand Theater Mitu's definition, is the impact that structure has on an audience. Any kind of structure, right? The impact that any kind of structure has on the individuals who are traveling through that structure. I often tell students, the simplest example is think of a roller coaster, right? So a roller coaster has a structure. You get on the roller coaster. If the roller coaster just goes like this, the impact is, oh, look at that. If the roller coaster goes like this, you go, ah, right? Now, if the roller coaster does this, it's a whole other shape and a whole other experience. The best way to think at is, to us, that structure is the dramaturgy of the roller coaster. In other words, that's the structure. When you take that idea and elevate it to look at performance work, the notion is the work that you're viewing at any moment has a structure, and that structure is impacting you. We as a company are obsessed with structure. Everything we experience has structure, whether it's intended, improvised, unintentional, right? Your day has a structure, a song has a structure, etc. At the end of the day, you can look back and go, this is how my day went. And that structure, which will have had an effect as to how that day went. That structure could have been aligned, it could have been fast, slow, speed, something that incorporates all of this language, right? So for us, in discussing dramaturgy, it's not only about the dramaturgy of the work that's being presented, but it's also about the dramaturgy of our process. What is the structure of our process, right? And what in that structure, again, is inherited, right? So the bigger conversation in PRELUDE, which I'm over the moon to be a part of with Theater Mitu, and the conversation that I've had with Sanas and with David, who have been remarkable curators in the conversation around this, is what is the role of this action of disrupting in a moment of actually great disruption that's happening sociopolitically, right? In many ways, artists have always been the disruptors, right? But what does that mean to disrupt what's disrupted when it's disrupted on top of disrupted, right? And so it feels like those interruptions on top of interruptions, and it becomes to actually become a static in many ways, at least in our view. For us, we actually turn what I think is a really potent action, which is to disrupt, and actually face it internally. Which is, in fact, our goal is not necessarily to generate disruptive work, though our work may or may not be seen in that way, but it's actually to disrupt the dramaturgy of our process, to actually challenge those inherited structures and how they impact the work that we make. And to constantly be in a state of interrogating not only the inherited, but even the things that we discover and how they work, and how easily we get comfortable with it, and what is it doing in the process, who is it giving voice to, et cetera, et cetera. So this is where the notion of dramaturgy of disruption comes into bearing, which is, for us, it's the idea of taking disruption and using it quite internally. Right? Again, the work itself may or may not, it may look like different things, it may look expected, unexpected, but what we're looking at again is this question of process, right? And so we begin to really obsess about those inheritances and really to look quite concretely. So what I'd like to do, and then I'm going to pass it on to the work, but what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about some of the inheritances and how we push against them. Y'all hanging in there? Okay, it's a lot coming at you. I'm Mexican, so I talk really fast. I'm also from, it's called the Speed Belt of northern Mexico, which includes Cuba and Puerto Rico, and we talk really fast. So if at any point, it's a small group, so if I lose you, you can be like, I hear a lot of words, but I don't know what you're saying. And I'll go back. Okay, so a few things. I won't be able to get through all of them. First is this notion that's important to us, which is the idea of trustworthy collaborators, right? This is, and you'll hear us as a company, we're opinionated about these things. I would say we're opinionated until we're not, which is that we go, this is it, and we have discovery, we're like, oh, or this, right? And we sort of go this route. So you're going to hear a lot of opinions on you, and the hope is actually that it engages a kind of conversation. So to us, one of the really key points as a company is this notion of trustworthy collaborators. We argue that as a theater system, we have inherited the notion that there are collaborators in the room that are untrustworthy. Actors are considered untrustworthy collaborator in most systems of theater making, which is, as an actor, the cliche is you are nervous, paranoid, vain, self-centered, so we're going to keep you out of the room as long as possible, so that when you come in, you have a very small window of opinion, and God forbid, you have an opinion outside of your body and your lines. If an actor comes on stage and says, what's happening with this set piece? They are a problematic actor, right? Because they're an untrustworthy collaborator. And in fact, in many ways, we train towards that, which is you keeping your terrain, right? Designers are a little more trustworthy, right? Playwrights are a lot more, and of course, the director is the trustworthy collaborator, right? We find that to be a really problematic rhetoric. I don't want to work or generate an environment of untrustworthiness. I want to sit with trustworthy collaborators from beginning to end. What that requires is for every single individual to be present from the beginning of an idea and an instinct, and to validate that the instinct of someone whose core practice may be acting is as valid as that of someone whose core practice may be playwriting or directing. And that first and foremost, we sit as artists in the world who are receiving the world and reacting to it. And then we begin to engage perhaps in our unique practices. But to us, we really push against that. And I invite you in your practice to consider what are those spaces. Now here's the deal I will say. I have conversations with your colleagues who are like, but I like that system, totally cool. But what we push against is the idea that that's the only system, right? The idea is that there's many other spaces. And this notion of really investigating what are those spaces, right, that really generate a trustworthy environment. Next, it's the idea of collision versus collaboration, right? As a company, actually, we don't believe in the traditional definition that's often engaged in the word of collaboration. We have come into view that collaboration means agreement and that it's most often democratic. We actually believe that agreement and democracy are the poison of collaboration. Collaboration is actually an ability to hold multiple truths and move forward with that. This is a massive crisis in our socio-political system. That we're reaching a moment that it becomes so difficult for anyone to hold other than one truth and to say either you're against me or you're with me, right? My father, for example, has beliefs that sit very much at odds with mine, and I love my father. I'm able to hold both of those things, right? And what has to happen is I then navigate the experience with him, right? Versus you're against me or you're for me. And that's actually a really challenging space. We believe that that's the most dynamic space of collaboration. We as a company are deeply committed to arguing respectfully, gracefully, joyfully, and to actually literally get red in the face and be like, how can you can't say blah, blah, and engage in that. And knowing that the next sentence has to be, want to grab lunch? Because there is a kind of respect, there's a kind of acknowledgement that that person is a valid human being, and that in fact, those disagreements bring a kind of tension into the room. And that's where our work lives. It doesn't live in saying, do you like it when it's red? Well, I don't like red. Okay, what about blue? What about yellow? No. Maybe like sepia? Okay, well, that's not offensive. And at the end, we've done this. And we go, everybody good with sepia? Okay. Right? I actually want to be like, I want red, I want polka dot, I want green. How can all these exist and be meaningful, right? And to acknowledge that that's actually the experience in an audience. That you don't have one unified truth on every single belief, but rather you have a multitude. And to me, that's the work that moves me deeply as we make work. I'm very proud. We actually just came back literally last night from Sarajevo. We were proud to be the official U.S. selection for the Sarajevo Mess Festival. And it was actually so remarkable to see a whole range of works that represented a whole range of countries, cultures, ethnicities, races, intersectionalities, and to actually see a whole host of belief systems. And we would finish the work that we were seeing, and we were like, we gotta go have dinner and think through this, and because even we don't agree on what the experience was, right? To us, that's a space of collaboration. Next, is this idea of instinct versus justification. And this is a really important part of the work that we do, which is, for us, we realized, I'll speak of my own training. When I went to grad school, I really went to grad school to a space where justification was the only mode of getting anything artistically done. In other words, if I encountered a piece of work that I was going to make into a theater piece, and I would say, when I read it, I just feel these colors like the red and images of trees, the next question was, justify it. Where is that in the text? Where is that in the, you need to justify it, or that idea has no right. And so what I was made to do was actually at first repress instinct, right? And then by the time I got angrier, then it forced me to bullshit justification. To actually be like, yeah, sure. Oh, when the character says it, right? And what happened, what it made me is a really good grant writer. I mean, that's actually, but I say that because what starts happening is there is a kind of deceptiveness there, versus the notion of when I encounter the material with full heart, with full mind, there's a kind of openness that happens, and this is what comes to mind. Right? There's a little bit of kind of oracle in that, which I think is really exciting. And the idea is we now begin to make work to explore that. And when we get to the proverbial opening night, I hope to go, that's why we dreamt of those yellow coats. Of course, we didn't know until this moment, versus we found it on page 74, and it will show the empathy between, well, if it's already doing it, then let's move on to the next thing. And so this idea becomes really a key thing. I'm going to actually pause us there. I'm being mindful of time. I have more, and I'll jump in with a few as we go through the pieces. And what I'd like to do is actually move us to look at some of the work that we're going to see. So what I would like to do is we're going to jump forward substantially, and we're going to look at a few sections of a piece called Remnant. This is the piece that's in our repertoire at the moment. It's the piece we just presented in Sarajevo that will continue its tour. We've marked some of the technology here, but you'll see that the architecture of it is of a much different scale. So I invite you to imagine with us that we've had remarkable support here to bring some of those elements to life. I'll say a couple of things about Remnant. Remnant is a piece that really looks and obsesses about that word. In other words, that which is left behind, right? In all sorts of scenarios. The piece has these three distinct performance areas, and as an audience, you experience the entire piece through headphones. And so the piece is designed. Here, we're actually going to hear through speakers. I was telling technicians earlier that I'd never heard it through speakers, which is so wild. So for me, I feel like, now we're stuck in headphones, let's break that expectation, right? And so it's interesting even in this example to do that. The piece sources classical text, interviews a whole host of different things, and you'll hear that come together as we go through the work. We're going to show samples of each of the three performance structures, and we'll literally take 1 minute to shift things over, and then I'll talk about the next piece that we'll look at. So let's do it. So we'll look at, this is the first section of Remnant, which we call box C, and we'll shift the lights, please. If we could shift to the lights. And this is the company. Just so you know. So this will be, I'll interrupt us in the middle of it. This will be a section of the first, what we call the first structure in this, and then we'll shift into the second and then the third. Great. Alex, over to you.
I want you to know that this is perhaps the most important job I've ever been given, and I'm determined to succeed. With your help, of course. We're going to start by finding out how much you understand. I'll ask questions, and you answer. But remember, you answer by blinking once for yes or twice for no. You ready? Good. Is the sun too bright for you? Am I a man? Am I a woman? Is it midnight right now? Are we in Paris? Are we in the hospital? Do you remember having a stroke? And we saw wood with a hammer. Does wood float on water? Do you remember your stroke? ETAOINUSHRPCDYWENXBFGJKLQ and Z. As you can see, this is not the alphabet we learned in school. These letters are in order of the most frequently used in the language. Do you understand? Yes. I've talked to a host of colleagues, and I hope I've come up with a viable system. This is how it works. You think of something you want to say to me, and when you're ready, you blink. And then I'll recite this alphabet very slowly, letter by letter. When I get to the first letter of your word, you blink. I'll write it down, and we'll go on to the next letter, and the next, and the next. Sometimes I'll be able to guess what you want to say, and in that way we'll form words and sentences. Two other things. You blink twice when the word is formed, as if you're hitting the space bar on a keyboard, and blink rapidly if you make a mistake. All right? Yes. I know it sounds terribly arduous, but believe me, we'll become experts very quickly. And your friends and family can use it too, so the whole world will be open to you. You want to try? Have you thought of something you want to say? Good. So, let's begin. E is the first letter. E is not the first letter. Okay, it's difficult, I know, so let's go slowly. E, T, A, O, I. I is the first letter. I is the first word. Good. I.
Well, so I can make some unassailable statements about what happens when you die. So you spend your life eating food, and food has a calorie content, and a calorie is a source of energy. It's actually a unit of energy. You bring it in, and then that energy is available for you to maintain your body temperature at nearly 100 degrees. It's actually 98.6. But how do you keep something at 100 degrees when nothing else around you is? You're burning energy to sustain that, because biologically we need to be at that temperature to function, okay? You also need energy to walk and to move, and that's why you eat food. Now, the moment you die, what happens? You don't maintain the energy, and your temperature drops. How far does it drop? To room temperature. At a funeral, in the casket, if you touch the hand of the person in the casket, your first thought is, oh, the body's cold. Well, no, it's not. It's room temperature, but it's cold compared to 100 degrees. They're no longer burning this energy. Okay, so now, every one of your molecules has energy within it. If you get cremated, that energy gets released in the form of heat. And you heat the air, and that air radiates to space. You get buried, which is how I want my body to be disposed of. Bury me. Bury me. You know why? Because I don't want the energy content of my body to just get radiated out into space of no use to anybody. No, put me in the ground. Let the worms and the microbes come in and out of my body, and the energy content of my body that I had assembled over the course of my lifetime, consuming the flora and fauna of this earth. My body then returns to them, and thus is the cycle of life.
Thanks for your email, and thanks for letting me do the interview with my mom. I know the company has been doing all the interviews, so I appreciate it. And sorry for being out of touch. I've been busy with family since she's passed. I should be able to get you the file by next week, when I'm back in New York. Again, thanks.
What do you dream about?
Well, nowadays, after being diagnosed, I dream about many different things. I dream about living for you guys, living to be there to witness your successes and your lives, and just to witness a simple life. I used to dream of a more complex, luxurious, kind of sophisticated life, but you learn that every day is a gift, and I just dream of living every day.
How has your experience of time changed?
It does change. I mean, it changes you completely because you realize that you don't have that much time to do all you want to do. I used to not appreciate it. When you're young, all there is time. Oh, there'll be time for this, there'll be time for that. And as you grow older and you get sick, you realize that time is very precious and tomorrow's not a given.
Who has never killed an hour? Not casually or without thought, but carefully. A premeditated murder of minutes. The violence comes from a combination of giving up, not caring, and a resignation that getting past it is all you can hope to accomplish. So you kill the hour. You do not work, you do not read, you do not daydream. If you sleep, it is not because you need to sleep. And when at last it is over, there is no evidence, no weapon, no blood, and no body. The only clue might be the shadows beneath your eyes, or a terribly thin line near the corner of your mouth indicating something has been suffered. That in the privacy of your life you have lost something, and the loss is too empty to share.
If one goes back in time, one comes to the Big Bang singularity, where the laws of physics break down. But there is another direction of time that one can go in which avoids the singularity. This is called the imaginary direction of time. In imaginary time, there need not be any singularities which form a beginning or an end to time.
What have you tried to forget?
I try to forget sometimes the pain. It's too much pain. Too much pain. Physically and emotionally, and I try to forget sometimes that I'm not going to be here one day and be able to hug you guys and have a talk with you and your sister, and I try to forget that.
How do you want to be remembered?
It's a good one. I dream of being remembered as a happy person, as someone who didn't give up, as someone who fought until the last breath, as someone who took pain in stride and wasn't afraid to say enough is enough. Because you know when enough is enough. But I want to be remembered as a strong-willed, determined, a determined person.
If you could live forever, would you? I mean, sure, it's an attractive idea, but the way I look at it is the knowledge that I'm going to die that creates the focus that I bring to being alive. The urgency of accomplishment, the need to express love now, not later. we live forever, why ever even get out of bed in the morning? Because you always have tomorrow. Well, that's not the kind of life I want to lead. I don't fear death. I love the unknown. You know what I want on my tombstone? Be ashamed to die until you have scored some victory for humanity. That's what I want on my tombstone. But it is true, we fear death because we are born knowing only life.
There are obviously a lot of ways. I don't know if you've heard of this, but there is in Japan. There's a disconnected phone booth. It's in a small town, and people go there to speak to relatives who have died or have gone missing.
If you're out there somewhere, please listen. It's your voice, you're across the sea. Tried so hard, words aren't enough. Hurry home to you. Won't give up. When the car goes by, I can't help myself. I'm about to do it.
There's a couple of things that I want to mention along with this list of dramaturgy and disruption. One of the big reasons that as a company we engage in technology is really to look at technology as a collaborator. And that inhabits everything I was talking about in collaboration, that in fact, often technology, it doesn't agree with us. We just have to stay stubborn with it. And so it creates this kind of tension that it really breeds a kind of new work, right? And so technology is not only playing out in your experience, but it's actually playing out in theirs. So you know, all the performers are in ears, so they're actually hearing the show and a whole other kind of viewing life is inside there, as well as how they interact with different parts of the technology. And that's a big part of how we make work, because again, it forces you to engage with that obstruction in a lot of ways. The other is a big part of the work that's often inherited as a theater maker is this idea that we're storytellers. We actually push against that a little bit. And in the work that we do, we don't consider ourselves storytellers. We actually consider ourselves image makers and invite the audience to be story makers. And so the idea is really that we're presenting a series of potent, hopefully, and meaningful images, and that it's really your own reflection into the conversation that completes it. So then when you walk away with different aspects and different reflections of it. And again, that's a really kind of thorough inheritance that happens. We're good on this side? Okay, right. So this is again a little excerpt from another one of the structures in PRELUDE. So Alex, over to you.
Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, and those that reject the gender binary. Welcome to the Segal Center. This afternoon, An intrepid performance company from Brooklyn, Theatre Mitu, presents their new piece titled Remnant. Here's a little context on the word remnant. A noun, the word originated in Old French as remenoir, and Middle English as remanent. It has a variety of meanings depending upon how it's used. It can mean a small remaining quantity of something. For example, the remnants of the picnic. It can also mean a piece of cloth or carpeting left when the greater part has been used or sold. For example, remnants of cloth. And now, a word from our sponsors.
Bigelow styles, or zodiac personalities. Scorpio, energetic, independent, passionate. A woman who either hates you or loves you. For this woman of strong tastes, Bigelow creates Dauphine, the ultimate plush, all acrylan acrylic. It's a good feeling. Big, rich, very luxurious, but tough enough to take it. And as for colors, Dauphine comes in 20 shades of brilliance and sophistication for Scorpios. If you're not a Scorpio, Bigelow creates carpets for all zodiac personalities.
Bigelow did a beautiful thing for me. Why don't you call them and see what they can do for you?
Call this number free for the name of your nearest Bigelow dealer and see what they've created for your zodiac personality.
Thanks, Bigelow. The best company around for those pesky remains nobody wants. Welcome back, everybody. Finally, the word remnant can mean a surviving trace. For example, a remnant of the past. And now for my favorite part of the program, when we go around and show you some scraps from the past. First up, a little atomic science. We have a very special guest this evening. He calls himself the sound objectologist. He's going to go ahead and play this unique instrument. Wow! I've never seen anything like this thing. It's got a lot of knobs and buttons and hee-haws and you-haws. Okay, let's give this fellow a chance to strut his stuff. My producer tells me that he became famous for speaking this quote from an ancient Indian poem called the Mahabharata after watching the first bomb explode. He said, and I quote, "Now I have become death, the destroyer of worlds." Isn't that something? Okay, let's listen in. Makes me think of the afterlife. See, everyone's got their ideas about where we go after we die, but nobody really knows the facts. Which brings us to our next musical guest. She's a wonderful performer, and I'm very excited to have her here. One of her great strengths, I think, is her vitality, her constant determination to live life to its fullest. I don't have anything like that in my character whatsoever. I love to play it as an act, but I can't live it as a human being. She's just fascinating. Now, before we get to the music, we've cooked up a little routine for you about the ancient Egyptians and the afterlife. I hope you enjoy it. Did you know that according to the ancient Egyptians, we all have a bird inside of us?
The bird with luminous wings? Yes! You must mean the bird they call the Ba.
Why, yes.
It is a creature of divine intelligence, you know.
I've heard it's inside us temporarily.
Yes, the Ba's the light within your mind while you live. Can you believe that?
That's what I've heard.
But in death it must return to the heavens. They say that this bird is eternal.
It is?
Why, yes, it is.
Does it ever flap its wings?
Yes, and when it does, they say we feel such tenderness.
Oh my, this bird sounds like an angel.
Yes.
can see it.
Watch carefully.
Oh no, look, one of its wings is injured.
Yes, I see it.
Where do those injuries come from?
I think it carries the injuries and scars of the living.
Will this bird ever die?
Oh, no, that bird will never die.
Never?
Never.
Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens. Now, she's going to play a little song for us. It's one of my favorite little ditties. It might be a bit macabre, but it's sweet, and that's how I like it. This one is called Cinder's Song.
Many a year has passed since they buried her away, but her withering corpse we've here amassed. We shall burn it to cinders today. Here is her ear, which no longer hears, and here is her brain, now it feels no more pain. A few drops of blood, the rest turned to mud, the rest turned to mud. Many a year has passed since they buried her away, but her withering corpse we've here amassed. We shall burn it to cinders today. Here is her hair, once it was so fair, and here is her heart. Never restore. A few drops of blood, the rest turned to mud, the rest turned to mud. Now what's left of her are the burns that were finally unmade. Many a year has passed since they buried her away, but her withering corpse we've here amassed. We shall burn it to cinders today. Burn it to cinders, burn it to cinders, burn it to cinders today.
And now a word from our sponsors, the Body Mic. Unlike any microphone you've ever seen, the Body Mic, instead of amplifying your voice, this one amplifies your past and all of the memories inside of you. With the Body Mic, you can bathe in the nostalgia of memory while healing the traumas of yesterday. Warning, not to be used by children under 12 without adult supervision. Now folks, for the first time in this studio, our sound objectologist is going to demonstrate the Body Mic live. He's going to take us back to the time of the great King Arthur, because you can't talk about death without talking about war.
Having made peace through war, King Arthur found the dilemma of all soldiers entering tranquility. He couldn't have to spend his nights in a world where violence slept uneasily.
It is difficult, if not impossible, to keep the strength and temper of fighting men without fighting. For nothing rusts so quickly as an unused sword or an idle soldier.
King Arthur watched in apprehension while the young knights dissipated their strength in the mires of complaint, confusion, and self-pity, condemning the old time without having created a new one.
I wish I could understand it, King Arthur said. They complain the times are against them.
Guinevere responded, and so the times are.
What do you mean?
They are idle. The times make no demand on them.
What can I do?
You are not the first or the last. Consider, just as a healthy man has little pains, so is peace a composite of small wars.
This afternoon I have something very special for you. I've been given this book. It comes from the land of India, and it contains a poem from ancient times about a great war. Once upon a time, there was a family fighting over who would control a great kingdom. It quickly became a massive war with millions of people involved. The destruction was so catastrophic that it actually changed the course of humanity. Can you believe that? It happens. This poem is called, now listen closely, I've mentioned it before, it's called the Mahabharata. Now, with your permission, I'd like to read a little from this poem. Before the fighting began, the great hero of our story was riding in his chariot, heading to battle, when he spoke to his charioteer.
Drive this chariot and stop it between the two great armies.
When he saw the armies standing there, he saw faces and lives and histories. The young hero spoke once more and said,
My legs weaken, my mouth dries, my body trembles. No good can come from killing these people in battle.
He sank down into the chariot and dropped his arrows and bow, his mind heavy with grief.
I will not fight,
he said, and fell silent. As the hero sat there downcast between the two armies, his charioteer smiled at him and then spoke these words.
Stand up. Even as you are surrounded by death, you must move forward. You don't have to kill, but you must fight for something.
What a dynamite poem. It can ease the loneliness of a long, dark night. It's a spectacular beach read, and a great companion while your near and dear lies in a hospital bed next to you. Let me know what you think, folks. We'll be taking calls later in the program. Now, another word from our sponsors.
Great. And we'll hold there. Thank you. So we have two remaining short excerpts. The next is a very short excerpt from the last of the performance structures from Remnant, and then after that we're going to jump to a very short 5-minute section from another piece, just to give a little interaction there. I want to make sure that I'm covering everything. Great. As folks set up, another point that I want to cover in this investigation of disrupting dramaturgy, and this is something important to us, is that we really engage in this kind of fluidity of role. So oftentimes, one of the really tricky conversations in speaking of theater Mitu's work is this question of who did what, in terms of who made, who wrote, who designed, and so forth. That becomes really challenging for us because it really is this cohesive creative space, so that oftentimes someone whose core practice may be acting really investigates something technological, but then doesn't complete it and passes it on to somebody else, which becomes part of another piece, and then interjects text from somebody else. So it really becomes this kind of genealogy to look at the ideas of the piece and to understand them, right? This larger framework of Remnant really started as a conversation actually on the subject of trauma, particularly in spaces of post-combat, of PTSD. And we did a whole host of interviews throughout the world, and it really led us into a big conversation on death. In many ways, the reverse of what Dennis just spoke, which is we couldn't talk about war without talking about death. And so it became a whole other conversation, as well as bigger dialogues around what is left behind after those phases of war and of combat. And so you'll see that the last structure visits that consideration and looks at that interview text. We're good otherwise on this side? Thank you. So this is again from the third structure of Remnant. Alex, over to you.
To witness war is, in large part, to hear it. And to survive it is, among other things, to have listened to it. Or better, to have listened through it. The auditors of wartime Iraq learned to listen through the war. First, they were compelled to listen to the sounds of everyday life. Voices, music, sounds produced by the natural world, sounds produced by electronic media, through an intermittent scrim of bellophonic sounds, vehicular, weapon-related, and other sounds that armed combat produces. The bellophonic in this scenario was coded as noise, as something to be tuned out to the extent possible. Remaining sane in wartime depended, in some measure, upon one's ability to turn the mind away from the invasive and enervating sounds of military traffic, helicopter flybys, and distant gunfire, and toward more meaningful sounds, or sights, or smells, or bodily sensations, or the silent, internally voiced monologues that constitute thought.
Marine Corps, frontline assault. My military occupational specialty was 0351. Oh, this is my husband. He wanted to sit on the interview, if that's okay. We never really talked about this stuff, and he wanted to hear. I hope that's okay. When I was 17, I enlisted in the Marine Corps when I was 17. 9/11 was still pretty fresh in everyone's minds. I mean, it happened as I got into high school, so. Have you killed anybody? That's the number one question I've gotten. Have you killed anybody? I had 3 tours. I had 2 in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. Deployment was actually something to be kind of feared. I was really scared. But a part of me was like, a big part of me was like, this is my job. This is what I have to do. It's hell. War is terrible. Like, it's really, really, really terrible. Like, I can't even begin to describe how awful, but I got used to it. I mean, a lot of us got used to it. What specifically in my career? It was a new type of IED. They called it, it was an EFP, explosively forged projectile. Last thing I remember, it was a flash and a bang. Just debris like flying over my head, and then that's it. It was really hard when I realized I was being discharged. Yeah, I mean, like, I've always been like pig-headed, I guess. Like I don't like to admit when something's wrong with me, especially like emotionally. I mean, that's how I was brought up. Like, you know, men are not emotional. Well, yeah, so when I got out, they wanted me to see someone for PTSD. They wanted me to go see like a psychiatrist or something like that, but I didn't want to. I mean, a lot of the Marines I was with, you know, if you do that, then they won't let you keep a weapon. Yeah, you'll be flagged or something, so you can't. They'll be afraid that you can't handle it, and I just didn't want to have anything officially on record. Well, it's not like I've had like too many episodes. I mean, 1 or 2? Yeah, it's like when I've been sleeping, but it's nothing super bad. It's like every single day that I wake up and the light hits my eyes, I'm taken back to that exact feeling. It's hard to explain. You know, like in a movie that may trigger, you know, and get my heart beating, and that throws me right back in that scenario where I have my weapon laying right next to me, and I know I have to react right then and there, and so I start looking around, you know, just waiting for orders, and then I see him.
I guess there was before there was. I think I was before there was.
And I just keep telling myself that, you know, you're fine, you're all right, you're right here, you're at home. You know, there's nothing to worry about. I guess that, like, this is what I have to do every day when I wake up.
The number one question I've gotten, when people know that I was in the Marines.
I say constantly that I don't dream.
The number one question I've gotten, multiple times from so many people.
I can't remember the last time I had a dream.
Number one question. Number one question.
Maybe once a year, if that. It'll probably be about him, about a good life for us. That's all I want. But for the most part, I don't dream.
I was just a kid. Before, during, and after.
Great, thank you, Mike. We'll hold that. Great, thank you. The last little bit we'd like to share with you is from an altogether different piece. It's a piece called Grapefruit. This is a dance theater piece that really meditated on a whole host of subjects, including the body and the aging of the body in all sorts of different configurations. As we reset, another really key word in our process that we continue to challenge is really this idea that we somehow have to continuously reinvent ourselves as we look from piece to piece. In other words, the notion that we must scrap everything we did before to investigate a new piece, right? That nothing from another piece, God forbid, be in this piece. And we actually push against that and really look at the great privilege it is to be in a company who has a history together. And so the word that we chose is this idea of accessing the archive of Theater Mitu. And by that I mean that literally you will, and I hope as you see our work, you will see either phrases, physical actions, images that appear in several of the works that we're doing. And that's actually quite intentional because we continue to be obsessed with that, right? Versus what I call this kind of a pop culture phenomena that we're supposed to have, like in music, you have to have like your country album, and then like your hard rock album, and then you're like, now I'm sexy, and not right, like you keep reinventing yourself. And for us, it really is about continuing the work that Mitu has been doing. And so we just opened and closed a show in September at our space. It's our last project that we did called House. And if you saw the piece, you'll actually see some phrases of physicality that appeared in House are actually from this other piece called Grapefruit. And if any of you saw our production of Death of a Salesman, and then you see Remnant, you'll also see parts of Death of a Salesman almost being sampled into the work. And it's really this idea of accessing the archive of Theater Mitu, as well as all sorts of other source material. So again, this is from Grapefruit, and I'll pass it over to Al. Great, thank you.
Where do you go next, lighting cube?
Sounds like what's going on with you.
Well, I wanted to voice my opinion on something that's been bothering me for a really long time.
Okay.
I tried writing a newspaper and contacting TV stations, but nobody seems to want to stay with this. So that's why I'm calling you guys. Okay.
What's the issue?
Over the past few years, I was involved in 3 separate car accidents involving deer. The population and everything. Each of these incidents, they occurred shortly after I saw a deer crossing sign on the highway.
One, two,
well,
three, four.
My frustration that Minnesota and North Dakota Department of Transportation would allow these deer crossings to be in such high traffic areas. I mean, I've even seen them on the interstate. Why are we encouraging deer to cross at the interstate? I don't get it, it's such a high traffic area. I mean, you know, I understand that deer are wild animals, they travel across the streets occasionally to survive. Now, of course, there's nice food, but it seems to me that so irresponsible of us to allow these deer crossings to be in areas where these deer are so likely to be struck by oncoming traffic. I mean, would you agree?
1, 2, 3, 4,
I mean,
6, 7.
It's just, I mean, you think they would put deer crossings maybe, in smaller towns, maybe doing it like at a school crossing. It would be a safer place for them to cross.
Wait.
You know, the deer crossing time.
You know, deer crossings aren't telling deer that it's safe to cross there. It's just more of like an alert for drivers so they know it's like a high deer population.
The government of the deer crossings there, they can direct the deer population anywhere they want to by moving that deer crossing time. I mean, you know, why in the world would they place it on the highway or the interstate? You know? I mean, God, there are so many other places I can think of than putting the deer crossing signs on busy highways and interstate.
You seem to be under the misunderstanding that the deer are somehow attracted to the deer crossing sign.
Well, yeah, the deer crossing sign is there to allow the deer to know that's where they need to cross.
Right. And all these car accidents you had involved a deer after you saw a deer crossing sign.
Exactly. I mean, I try to watch out for the deer, but I mean, you know, be like 55, 65, how am I supposed to, you know, you can't brake really quick if you know, if the deer is crossing in that deer crossing area.
So you'd like to see these signs move somewhere safer?
Right, yeah, we can move them, like, don't put deer crossing signs on the interstate or freeways, you know, put them in lower traffic areas, you know, somewhere where the speed limit, you know, a lot slower, you know, maybe small towns, I don't know. I think school crossings is a good idea.
Well, listen, we will, you say you tried to contact quite a few people about this.
Right, yeah, I wrote like at least 3 or 4 letters and...
We will spread the word, okay? We will try to kind of help you raise some awareness for this issue, okay?
Oh, thank you. We need to move those deer crossing signs.
We appreciate your comment this morning.
All right, thanks.
Bye. 2, 3.
Thank you. And this is the next lecture. We can sit down for Kevin. So we'll wrap up this portion of our conversation with passing it on to, and I hope this works, to spending a few minutes with a scholarly response to our work. And we can actually join into the audience as Kevin will come on screen. What we'll do is actually a dear colleague and collaborator, Kevin Riordan, will be joining us if this goes well, because he'll be joining us from Singapore. Now, this is a very classic mode of collaboration for Theater Mitu, which is not only are we using the magic of technology, but it's also 3 a.m. in his time. So he's going to spend a few minutes with us. He's a remarkable scholar and a really, really brilliant man. He is a professor at Nanyang University in Singapore and is in residence with Theater Mitu. And so, is that true? Do I pass it over to Kevin? Let's see. Now, Kevin should be able to hear us, but perhaps not see us. All right, bring him on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to the organizers and to Theater Mitu for inviting me to speak, for bearing with and indeed embracing the distance and this technological interface. And in some ways, this is trying to model some of the things I think we're talking about how we move the form. So I realize we're a little short on time, so on the fly, I'm going to... Are we projecting?
Are There we go.
We are projecting?
Yes, I see you.
Okay. Hi, good to see you, or not see you, but you're seeing me ostensibly. So I realize we're a little short on time, so I'm gonna shorten some of this up and get to what I think is the most prescient thing I have to say about adding a little bit of vocabulary to what Ben and the performances have shown us. So I was going to take on the idea of making a definitional theater, or a theater that deals with first practices. So I was going to take the line straight off the website from Theater Mitu, driven by a commitment to innovation. This is the quote: Theater Mitu expands the definition of theater through methodical experimentation with its form. Mitu's practice interrogates the definition of theater, but I see this interrogation taking on different forms in their early work, with its commitments to physical training, to engagements with world theater traditions, and its confrontations with mythology and belief, and the later work, of which you saw some samples today, which is characterized more, I'd say, by technology, visual and plastic arts, and documentary and archive. So, reading this, that articulation of purpose, I will look at the process of definition as a site for theater practice, but will not attempt to narrate the evolution in Mitu's work. That would sort of belie the differences, but to stage how even in the longer view, body of work expresses a dramaturgy of disruption. So to give some language to this, I'll first play with some old definitions of theater to articulate something about Mitu's methods and theater's rhythms, particularly in terms of synchronization and syncopation, words that bear only a deceptive resemblance to one another. And I'll suggest that in general terms, this newer work is characterized by an intense interest in the syncopated, in theatricalizing and giving artistic form to disruption and disturbance. So again, I'm going to skip ahead to talk about the syncopation stuff that comes a little bit base at the end. So basically through the first half, I'm talking about the ways in which theater, as we generally conceive it, has this interest in synchronizing, and that the later work of Theater Mitu anyway, and this dramaturgy of disruption is trying to push us in some other directions. So I'll pick back up about halfway through what I prepared. So in a tradition of performances based in ritual, there's a kind of fleeting moment of intensity, what we could call the aspiration of whole theater, that Theater Mitu describes as this simultaneously intellectual, emotional, or spiritual moment. In performance studies, Victor Turner would call it the spontaneous communitas. And it's this fleeting moment of intensity and connection, or even trance, is seen as the ideal. And our training and our study of forms may help us get there, but it's an impossible theater to sustain. An interest and even an obsession with that impossibility guided a lot of Mitu's early work, examining how the materials of theater have been historically and presently deployed to produce and maintain that synchronicity. But theater, in most of its primary manifestations, as a research method, as an everyday practice, remains characterized, I think, by a lot more syncopation. The mode of communication is always this uneven back and forth, a kind of call and response. It's us interacting with this kind of present world that we then began with. The best theorist to kind of describe the syncopation, and this will be my one big quote, is Gertrude Stein. And so in her 1932 lecture Plays, she describes this sensation of theater as the syncopated. And bear with or enjoy the Stein prose. The thing that is fundamental about plays is that the scene as depicted on the stage is more often than not, one might say it is almost always, in syncopated time in relation to the emotion of anybody in the audience. What this says is this: your sensation as one in the audience in relation to the play played before you, your sensation, I say, your emotion concerning that play is always either behind or ahead of the play at which you are looking and to which you are listening. So your emotion as a member of the audience is never going to be the same as the action of the play. So some of Theater Mitu's later work has gravitated here, to think about not eliminating syncopation, but expanding it, dilating it, manipulating it, and embracing it as part of the work itself. This premise works in friction with some of our most long-standing convictions about art. Since Aristotle, theater has been composed as unity and continuity rather than disruption. While this is, of course, radically challenged, for example, by early 20th century avant-garde artists, their fragmented works were often rationalized and codified into new kinds of wholes. But how can the fragment remain sustained and shared with a witness on its own terms? Could this be a way to think through some of the work we just saw today? To me, Remnant and a lot of the other recent work accentuates and embraces disruption, using theater's constitutive syncopation as a force to expose and to make significant the striking, the detritus of theater research, and indeed human experience. My last little bit here. In 2017, researchers from University College London conducted an experiment in which they found that an audience's heartbeats became synchronized during a performance of Dreamgirls in London. The playwright Aya Akhtar wrote about this in the New York Times. This struck me as one of those lovely art and science moments where discovery articulates something that we had all sensed before. We have that sense of recognition, of unforgetting. But these heartbeats came to mind when I was scrounging around looking at etymologies for synchrony and syncopation. They share that opening prefix of togetherness, that S-Y-N, but syncopation goes in other directions. It's defined familiarly in terms of music, as displaced accents and beats, but also dropping or shortening things, as in elision. But the history of the term, and I realize there's been etymology all over the place today, links it to swooning and to being affected with this affliction called syncope. The latter half of syncopate comes from the Greek koptime, meaning to strike or to cut off. And this affliction, syncope, is defined in the OED as, quote, the failure of the heart's action. What an incredible way for thinking about theater. If we take Gertrude Stein at her word, what can we learn from this art of disruption, the failure of the heart? And I'm reminded, too, of that Thai derivation of Mitu. If theater, in Beckett's words, is the art of meaningful failure, in which we try again, fail better, how might we study and interrogate and transform failure? Perhaps in performing that process and witnessing the failing of a heart's action, we will come to discover other things, too, about the actions of the heart. And I'll stop there. I know we're behind on time. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Kevin. I don't know if Kevin will be able to hear me, but thank you. Because of time, and because again, here, I'll do this only so Kevin can hear me. Hello, testing, maybe? Can you hear me in there? Yes. Kevin, you can hear me, maybe?
I can, yes.
Okay, great. Kevin, thank you so much. In the interest of time, because we started a little late and ran a little late, we're actually going to clip there we go, I'm off. We're going to clip the programming, and we're actually going to stop here instead of going on to a Q&A. What we would like to do is, the company, we're more than happy to stick around, and if anybody wants to hang out and chat or have any questions, we'd absolutely love to do that. I want to take a moment really quickly to introduce company members that were here, of course, Michael Liddick, Dennis Butkus, Isabel Skategi, Alex Hawthorne, Anna Westfall, Kayla Aspel, Scott Spar, and of course Justin Nestor. Did I skip anybody? And I also want to take a moment to thank David and Sanas for inviting us to be a part of this, so thank you so much. And of course to thank Frank Hensker, who's one of my favorite people in the world and a big part of dreaming this entire thing up. And of course CUNY and everybody, all the team that's helped us. So thank you so much. Kevin, wherever you are, thank you again. I'll pass it over to David with Mike, so continue.
No, I was just going to say quickly, where can people find Theater V2? Do you guys use social media? Where can they say hello, visit the space?
Yeah, definitely. So we have a lot of social media. So you can find us on Instagram, you can find us on Facebook, of course our website, theatermitu.org, or come hang out with us at Mitu 580 in Brooklyn and Gowanus. It's a really cool space. We'll have a whole range of programming and events, not only Theater Mitu productions, but also collaborations, residencies. We have a whole host of programming coming this season, so come hang out with us. It's a really cool space. Yeah, anything I'm forgetting? No. Great.
Great, and we have a program going all through the rest of the day, including a closing party late this evening. There's a work in process happening right now in the Segal Center, which you can gently and gracefully enter into. So thank you guys for coming, and we hope to see you more in the next 8 hours or so. However long this thing is going.
Thank you so much.
Another one at 7 o'clock. We don't make it to this one, and the closing night party is at the Museum of Sex. Come tonight, so please come to that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.